Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our Soul info session. If you haven't yet had the chance, if you can please sign the QR code either on the screen or on the table in front of you to sign in, that would be great. And we'll jump right in. So I'm Lee Edelblue. I'm the program coordinator for the Hart Leadership Program. So any questions you have about the application process, about the program after this event, feel free to direct them towards me. And then with us today, we have Professor Andrew Nurkin, who is the director of the Hart Leadership Program. And then our three panelists here. So we have Ashley, Mariana, and Andrew.
Yeah!
And they will tell you more about themselves as we continue through. So, all right. Soul. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. Our agenda is what is soul, how to apply, and then what you're all here for, the Q&A with our past fellows. So, what is soul? It's a fun experience where you get to take a lot of pictures of doing cool things. All right, so Soul is a 12-month leadership program for students who are interested in addressing complex social and humanitarian challenges and trying to bring about social change. So we're focused on community engagement and ethical leadership. There's 3 components to Soul. You've got a gateway course, an immersive summer experience, and then a capstone course in the fall. So our gateway course, Mariana is going to share with us about that.
Right, okay, so, you're right on there.
Hello, okay. So our gateway course, Public Policy 263, doesn't actually have to mean you are a public policy major, but it's taught by Professor Zagbayu, and it's where you kind of start getting into the questions about community engagement and situating yourself in a community, what that looks like to you, what actually engaging ethically with a community, especially getting ready for a short summer experience in maybe a place you've never been to before, looks like. And so I can say that a lot of the readings that Professor Zagbayu incorporates into the course have been probably some of the most transformative readings I've ever engaged with in my life. It's sometimes very theoretical, but it's always very grounding to go back to the classroom space and discuss all of the difficult ideas alongside a very committed community of peers. You start off the class with kind of anchoring commitments, and something that's very special about the Soul cohort is that everybody really abides by those principles throughout the rest of the semester and the rest of their time with Soul. Apart from discussions, the classes also involve a few guest speakers throughout the years. We get guests, that are like community practitioners. You get to ask them questions about a lot of your own leadership questions that you've kind of started developing over the semester. And I think the class is just a perfect foundation for going into your summer experience with more of a framework of what community is going to look like in your context, and at the same time you develop this support network of a lot of other Soul Fellows that are starting to grapple with the same questions. And I guess one of the key moments that I would highlight is that Professor Zagbayu always invites the cohort to her house for dinner after the semester, kind of as a send-off into the summer. And so I would say that the class is definitely not something that I let go of very easily. I still keep a lot of the language and the meaning that I found in that class with me as I move forward through my Soul experience. And it's something that I definitely hope to hold on to after the Soul experience is over.
Great, thank you. All right, so that is taking place spring semester. Professor Zagbayu teaches that. And once you finish your gateway course, you will move into your immersive summer experience. So this is just a fancy way to say your internship, your community project. Throughout the semester, you'll develop a plan for what you'll be doing throughout your summer. And then during your internship experience, in order to stay connected to the Soul community and to Hart, you will be writing 2 letters home. So Ashley's going to share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think like when I applied to Soul, there was a lot of focus on the summer in my mind. I was like, oh, I'm doing Soul for the summer experience. And the 2 classes are like the supplements to that. I really encourage you all to think about Soul as a holistic 12-month experience. And the reality is that your summer is 8 weeks of that. I think the summer was 100% a wonderful experience for a lot of people, including myself. But ultimately, I think a lot of the value in Soul comes from the classes, comes from the community, and comes from being to share and reflect as a group and ask questions where we all just kind of like stare at each other and we're like, there's no answer, and then we leave. But it's like it's just such a wonderful time. The reflective practice, so like Mariana said, a lot of what is done in the spring gateway course is relatively theory heavy. It's also very self-reflective heavy. And so what you're being asked to do is you're being asked to take high-level theoretical principles and ideas presented by like very renowned philosophers and theorists, and then take those ideas and reflect on how they apply to you, how they apply to what your vision is for your summer, and how they apply to your life beyond Soul. And those are very big questions, and sometimes it feels, at least to me, it felt a little bit challenging to understand, like, okay, I read all these books, I read all these readings, now I'm going to go to the summer and do like an internship. But I think there's something so powerful about having the language to articulate the challenges that you don't even know you're going to face yet. I think had I not taken the Gateway course before, I would have gone through my internship and just said like, oh, like that was a good experience. Oh, that felt a little weird, but I'm not really sure why. And I really, really think that the Gateway course was super helpful for that. Now, the letters home, I think, was where we like put those into practice. It's a reminder that you took the Gateway course, you committed to asking these questions, and the letters home and the reflective practice are a way to, put your money where your mouth is, really ask those questions and apply them to what you said you were going to apply them to throughout your summer. My letters home were kind of like crazy. I would be like, oh, like I love my summer, but then like, how do we be good people? And it was just like, it kind of went through like a little rabbit hole. But no lie, Professor Nurkin actually doesn't know this. Whenever I have a bad day, I'll go through my Sakai and I'll read Professor Nurkin's responses to my letter home because they're so affirming. And he's like, you're not crazy. Because I'll be like, I feel crazy. And he'll be like, no, Ashley, you're not crazy. And I'm like, wow, thanks. But like really like, it just reminds you that like Soul is more than an internship, right? And that like you should treat it that way. You're not here to make money. You're not there to like quote unquote network in a transactional way. You're there to enrich yourself and your experience, and in turn enrich communities that you care about and you want to impact in a positive way.
Awesome, thank you, Ashley. And then, of course, when you come back from your summer experience, you will be a part of the capstone course. So Andrew's going to share with us about that.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew. I really love the capstone course. It's sort of a chance to be in a class where you know everyone in the class, and it's a small class, and all of you have done a summer experience that's different in many ways, but also grounded in the same frameworks that you picked up on in the spring and kind of wrestled with and struggled against. And so it's a great chance to talk to people about these really transformative experiences that you've just had in a way that is productive and sustainable. So we spent like 2 weeks at the beginning, at least my year, we did like recapping our summers and giving presentations on what happened, what worked, what didn't, our letters home. And the rest of the class is structured in a way that is designed to try and take the combination of the theoretical frameworks you learned in the spring with the on-the-ground practice from the summer and kind of synthesize that together into something actionable. So the big project in the capstone course is a portfolio, just a collection of work that is dedicated toward a specific problem, like a policy problem, and it can be what you did over the summer. It doesn't have to be, but the idea is then you're working on this project as you're doing some incredible readings about theory of change and philanthropy and these other really big questions. The class is structured similarly to the Gateway course in that it's super discussion heavy, and a lot of the times, like Professor Nurkin or Professor Segbayu in the spring class won't really be talking that much, and the idea is that the students start leading the conversation. It's really, I think a lot of teachers say that that's the goal, but I think Seoul's the only experience I've had where that's actually been what's happened. And so you end up leaving each class with more questions than answers, but I think that's the sign of a good class.
Thank you. So, those are the components of the Seoul 12-month process. Our application timeline. Applications are currently open. They are due by Thursday of next week, at the end of the day. Decisions will be released on Monday, October 23rd, and if you're accepted, you will receive a permission number to enroll in that spring Gateway course. So book bagging begins on October 23rd, so we try to give you that permission number right away so that way you can kind of start building your schedule. You have a week to accept your position, and enrolling in the course is part of that acceptance. And then a date to keep in mind is Wednesday, November 15th in the afternoon or evening. We will have a orientation session for the new Seoul cohort to get to know each other and learn a bit more about what to expect in the coming year. All right, and now our time to learn from our panelists. So I'm going to have you guys each introduce yourself with, I mean, you've already shared a lot, but if you can share what you were doing this summer, or, sorry, during your Seoul summer. Yeah, if you can share what you were doing during your Seoul summer, and also maybe just what attracted you to Seoul in the first place. So,
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I did Seoul in 2022, so the entire calendar year 2022. I first learned about Seoul talking to a DAE my freshman fall, who then left her job a week later, so I felt really lucky. But she told me to talk to someone about a lab, and he mentioned the program to me, so it was kind of a long chain. But applied to Seoul, was super happy to be a part. I interned at Letcher County Culture Hub, so this is the summer after my freshman year, in a little town in Kentucky called Whitesburg, just southeastern Kentucky. It's in the Appalachian Mountains, and love to talk about that experience, but that's sort of a bit about me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mariana, pronouns she, her. I'm a sophomore, and I'm currently enrolled in the capstone course for Seoul, so I'm still in the middle of it. And I found out about Seoul through a former Seoul fellow who just happened to scribble down attend Seoul info session on a whiteboard in the Latinx student space. And so I attended the information session, and I think a lot of us are initially attracted to the language, in the title itself, like leadership. We're all here at Duke to kind of pursue this idea of leadership. So of course that was attractive to me, and I didn't really understand how much my ideas about leadership were going to change over the course of the next few months. And so I'm really lucky. I feel really lucky to be a part of Seoul. During my summer, I interned for an organization called Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center. It's in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, which is right on the U.S.-Mexico border. I started off in the summer doing more work related to post-release, so people that had just been released from detention and needed help with work permit applications or applying for IDs or getting resources in their new communities where they were going to be resettling. And then second part of the summer, I focused a little bit more on something called credible fear interviews, which is like a process that migrants have to endure in order to be able to apply for asylum. And so we kind of just help prepare migrants for those interviews. And then throughout the summer, I also did a few translations for evidence and then some declarations for human rights violations in the detention centers. So it was really all over the place, but throughout the experience, there was always, the SOUL framework kind of guiding me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior. If there are any juniors in the room, I encourage you to apply, and I'll talk about why later. SOUL. Okay, I see a lot of freshmen in the room, so I'm going to be really transparent. My freshman year, I was 2020, so it was lockdown. I had a lot of time on my hands, and I was like locked in my little Eden single. And I wrote down a list of all the things I had to do to be successful at Duke. I was like, I'm going to be a Rhodes Scholar. I'm going to be a, like a Huang Fellow. I'm going to do all of it. Needless to say, but SOUL was on that list. And I think initially, let's be real, freshman year, Ashley was 18. She was looking for the prestige. And I just heard a lot of good things about SOUL. A lot of upperclassmen that I really look up to were SOUL fellows. And so I applied my sophomore year, ended up getting rejected. And really, I think that was the right decision because I genuinely was not ready for it. I think after my sophomore year, I ended up taking some more Hart leadership courses, their flagship courses. And I really got more of a feel for where do I have to grow? Because to be honest, I couldn't even recognize where I still needed help. And so I ended up applying again my junior year in my fall, and I'm really grateful I did. I think I was really interested in this idea of what is the alternative of what is public service without having to enter government or really large NGOs? Because the reality is that Duke community engagement can kind of feel niche and underground sometimes. But I really knew that there were alternatives for me out there, and I also knew that there was a lot of room for personal growth for me there. And I wanted to do it I wanted to experience personal growth in ways that felt service-oriented and not necessarily about me, if that makes sense. I wanted my personal growth to be a byproduct rather than the end goal of my experience. And so I just went for it again. Oh, my summer experience. Anyways, okay, I worked for Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. They're based in the Southeast. They're headquartered in Atlanta, but I worked with the North Carolina coordinator in Durham, North Carolina. I was on the programming team, but because there's only one North Carolina coordinator, they only have one staff member here, and they have an additional staff member here for membership purposes. But I worked on the programming body, what that means, but also programming also meant that we were all the only staff in North Carolina. So I worked a lot on policy coalitions. For those of you who don't know, an abortion ban was passed this summer in the North Carolina state legislature. So the beginning of my summer was having to do a lot with strategizing with larger NGOs, nonprofits that are involved in the space, like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, that sort of thing. And then as my summer progressed, I worked a lot on outreach events. So Sister Song had a bus tour across the Southeast United States called Reproductive Justice on Tour, RJ on Tour. And I was in charge of organizing the 2 North Carolina events in Durham and Wingate, South North Carolina, which is a small town outside of Charlotte.
I'm wondering if the three of you can share how you kind of came to the organization that you ended up working with. So how did that idea start, and then how did you actually get connected?
Yeah, so the summer before, so my sophomore summer, I had worked for a sexual and reproductive health and rights organization, SRHR, And we worked, and that was also the summer that the Dobbs decision dropped, and that was a nonprofit in DC. So a lot of my summer was focused on abortion rights. And I actually applied into Seoul wanting to learn more about the field of abortion storytelling. How is storytelling a method of activism, and how can we structurally dismantle stigma, and like what does that look like without policy? That ended up shifting because I realized that I wanted to do more than just abortion rights activism. I knew that there was like a lot of intersections. I came to this idea of reproductive justice, which for those of you who don't know, is a very holistic framework. It recognizes the way that all social justice challenges limit our ability to autonomously control our bodies and our future. And Sister Song is a rather prominent organization in the field. They started off very small, and they still are very small, but I would say, like, in light of the Dobbs decision, I think a lot of organizations, particularly led by women of color and people of color, definitely came into the limelight a little bit more. So honestly, I wasn't even sure that I would partner with them. They were definitely something like aspirational for me because they had a lot of values that I'd aligned with, but I wasn't sure if it fit with the Soul Summer. But I ended up DMing them on Instagram because I was having a really hard time finding a community partner. But that DM on Instagram actually ended up working out, and yeah.
So I'm a gap year student. That's one of my personality traits. So during my gap year, we were in the midst of COVID. I really wanted to be involved in something. I knew I wasn't going to really be leaving my hometown during my gap year. And so I wanted to be involved in something that I knew was like a paramount issue for my community, which happens to be immigration because we're right on the border. And so I actually connected with this organization then during my gap year. However, everything was remote. And so I was, making calls from my room. I just felt very detached. The experience felt really difficult and inconclusive. I'm really lucky to have had the experience, but at the same time, I didn't really know how to explore or really navigate those circumstances or like what my position in those like types of organizations even was. And so Seoul, they gave us the option of doing an internship or a ground up project, which is, I guess, something that I imagined I would be focusing on since I already had connections with this community partner. And so I reached out to this community partner again. And I really love this organization. The supervisors were, always very kind to me. And so they were willing to talk about the possibility of doing some sort of like, project a little bit more outside of their range of, what interns usually do for the organization. I think that while my intention was originally pursuing more of a ground up project, doing something that felt like kind of I was spearheading, I kind of came to understand that even though I am from that community, like the community members there and the ones that have been organizing in that space for years are the ones that know what the community needs. And so that's kind of where I feel like my project shifted more towards, like, I guess a traditional internship, because really I just felt like I was there to help them with whatever they needed me to help them with, and, take every opportunity I could to, experience something new outside of the regular intern role, but at the same time, kind of understand that my community partner, whom I had, developed a close connection with already, knew where I could best serve the community.
So my freshman year, I was studying math and politics, and I really was interested in a project that was between those two fields. I was interested in who the financial system leaves behind, and a thought that popped into my head was related to microfinance. And so I spent a lot of January and February reaching out to sort of nonprofits working in that space, and it was basically like a huge stroke of luck, like a scholarship that I had applied to separately from Seoul that gave me the network to meet Annie Jane Cotton, who's the lead organizer for Letcher County Culture Hub. So Letcher County Culture Hub is basically a collective of nonprofits, and they work together to rebuild the Appalachian economy post-coal. So coal had left, that's like 90% of people's jobs and a lot of income that leaves the region at that time. And the Culture Hub was formed to diversify the economy in a post-coal world. And so there were firefighters organizations, there was a film nonprofit named Apple Shop. And so I ended up getting in contact with them because they were working on a project that required funding, but half of the organizations didn't even have a 501c3. And so they just can't get the funding. And so there were some small lenders in Appalachia that ended up working with this collective of nonprofits to send $500,000 to install solar panels on a bunch of the roofs of this town. And we're talking like coal miner country. Like these are people who like will tell you that their parents went to college because of their work in coal. And so politically, it was extremely complicated and extremely interesting, but also just like on a community level, Whitesburg looks nothing like me. And this is not a community that I'm used to interacting with at all. So that was a challenge, and it was a good challenge. And I ended up also hosting a community radio show inside Apple Shop. So they do radio show called WWMT and 88.7, and they host a bunch of different shows, and you just volunteer to host a show. So I ended up hosting a weekly show on Wednesday lunch that coincided with the Roe v. Wade ruling, because that was summer 2022. And so Kentucky is one of two states that had an immediate trigger law after that ruling happened. And so there was a lot of sensitivity in that area. And that community radio show became a chance for me to learn more and talk to people about their lived experience with regards to this issue. And so what started off as I think I'm interested in microfinance, turned into like a much more colorful set of issues, which I think is what Soul's supposed to teach you, is to learn how to form a relationship with the community where it's about the people more than the issues.
What questions do you guys have?
Just interject real quickly, just to flag something before we get to your questions. A lot of times we hear sort of, how do we figure out where our summer is going to be? And I think Ashley, Mariana, and Andrew represent kind of the three most dominant paths, which is I DM'd them on Instagram / found them somewhere and they were cool and I wanted to work with them, and so they responded to whatever message I sent them. It's an organization I previously have some relationship with and want to deepen that relationship and learn more from and alongside them, or I've been sort of connected through either contacts that we have at Hart or through some other program that's an existing placement that kind of has seen interns on a regular basis. So that's totally unplanned, actually, but a nice sort of answer to that question, that these are the ways you can do it. So, okay, what questions do y'all have?
I'd love to hear you guys talk a little about the community in the Soul program. I know you guys alluded to it, but I'd love to hear more.
Like the Soul cohort?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Mariana and I are from the superior Soul cohort. I'm sorry. No, that's not very Soul. Don't say that. I love our Soul cohort. We just have like a hoot and a holler every single class. But essentially, it was really funny because we all met the first time at that like orientation, if you saw the timeline, that happens in November. But throughout the class, because it is so reflective and because it encourages vulnerability in class discussions, I feel we just like get to know each other super well. Like, this is gonna sound crazy, but we like know each other's like hopes and dreams for the world, like because we talk so much about like what is your vision for the world, and so I think it is like one of the most like intimate ways to get to know each other is like what is your ideal world. I think everyone has such diverse interests. So, like we have a person in our soul cohort, his name is Griffin, if you guys know him. He's like really interested in water, and I'm just like, oh wow, I've like never thought about water, but like I know water is important now because of Griffin. Like Eleanor Mackey, if you all know her, she's really interested in like child development. Eleanor's brain works in a way that like I will truly never understand, but like in the most wonderful way possible because I'm terrified of children. But like you really get to know so many people from so many different perspectives, but ultimately you all share the commonality in that like you believe that the world is capable of more, and you believe that people are capable of more, and you believe that institutions are capable of more. And it's all about finding that path forward. I can probably like confidently say that a lot of us, if we like really dug deep, would probably disagree on a lot of like fundamentally disagree, not like like in a crazy way, but just like disagree on a lot of the questions that we are posed on, like the way we come to settle on a lot of the difficult questions that we come to encounter with throughout Soul. We probably would not like all agree on like a singular stance. But it just like enriches the discussions. It is done in such a respectful way. And I think we just like trust each other, our expertise. And I also have to credit like Professor Zagbayu and Professor Nurkin, just because like the environment of the class would not be possible without them either.
Yeah, I think the community of Soul is definitely my favorite part of the program. It just feels very organic in a way that you don't expect from a traditional classroom environment. And I felt that prior to Soul, and even now in classes that are not Soul classes, I feel like there's there's a lingering sense of like individualism, competition in every class. It's really easy to dismiss what your classmates and your peers are saying in class and then just kind of fervently write down notes whenever the professor's talking. But like even now, whenever Ashley and Andrew say something, it's everybody just always says something super brilliant, and I always write everything down. It's just an environment where people trust that they are committed to the learning process, and committed to nurturing each other. And there have been, last semester, there was a day where I was like having a particularly rough day, very vulnerable. And Soul was really the first time that I walked into a classroom environment and I was able to kind of break down those walls and everybody understood, and I didn't feel judged afterwards. And so I think that it's just a very unique environment to be able to find here at a campus like Duke. And I don't know, I feel like really humbled every time I go into class because everybody knows so much more than me in so many different ways, and I don't feel threatened by it. I don't feel like I need to know more or that I need to prove myself. And I think that speaks to the kind of environment that Soul crafts, and I'm really grateful for it.
So I originally was thinking that I did not want to apply to Soul because of the 2-class requirement, because I was not so sure about having to take a class in the fall. And now that I'm almost a year removed, I'm like, that to me was the point. Like, people go abroad and then people are abroad, and it's so sad. And I miss the people who are abroad so much. I did not know a single person in my Soul cohort coming into like 2022, and I'm good friends with a lot of them now. And it's like that by construction. I think that's just how Soul will work for every single cohort. Like, that's how the class is designed. That's how the structure of it, where you have the class after the summer, where you get to talk about your summer and you get to be super vulnerable about what you learned and what you thought you could have done better, and these sort of complicated ethical things that you have to deal with like all the time in these communities that you kind of enter and then leave, and all that creates a really incredible environment to get to know people. And so I found myself, I'm not in Stanford much anymore, but I found myself during the Soul classes coming early and then leaving late, which I think is how you know that like it was a good class. And it wasn't because I was confused about like what someone said. It was like just to be with the people in my cohort, and we'd like go to food trucks afterward and stuff like that. So it's super wholesome, like definitely the best part.
I kind of like a two-parter. First, I'm wondering if you could all speak more on how Soul helps you prepare to enter these communities. I think you spoke on it a little bit, Andrew, how you may go to these communities that have people that don't necessarily look like you or that you may not connect as immediately. And even you, Mariana, mentioning communities that you're very familiar with, but at the same time, getting to learn new aspects of that. Could you speak on that first?
So just to repeat the question, it's to how does the class prepare you to enter into the communities? Okay.
I can start. So for me, the most formative way that I see the Gateway course informing like my summer was the identity mapping experience that professors like Bayou had us do. It's like rooted in a lot of like theory, but essentially you do this exercise where you write down like every single identity umbrella that could possibly pertain to you, and you break down each one, how it applies to you and how it applies to the privilege that you have. And so for context, Sister Song is a very rare organization, I would say, in that it is a majority Black woman staff. And if not Black women, then Black people, and if not Black people, then people of color. It is an entirely people of color led organization. That being said, it was also it was led by predominantly Black staff. And I think that there were a lot of questions as to like how my Asianness and the East Asian identity in particular, and also like the additional ways that my identities and situate me and its proximity to privilege, that really helped me like understand how to, or it didn't help me understand per se, but it helped me approach my summer in ways that didn't feel petrifying. Because I think like so much of my Gateway experience was like, oh my goodness, I can't enter a community. I can't, I don't know what to do. I have to be like them to enter that. And that's not the case at all, I would say. I think what the Gateway course is going to do for you is it's not going to say you can do it. Just go and do it. Do whatever you want. It's fine. That's not what the Gateway course is meant to do. It's meant to enhance your confidence in ways that cause you to question yourself. And that sounds antithetical, but it's not. It gives you the opportunity and space and time and resources and people to practice self-reflection in ways that make you enter the summer saying I know that this summer is not going to be perfect. I know I'm going to experience challenges, but I've thought about this. I've mentally prepared for this. And if I have questions that I can't answer, that is in essence the purpose of this 12-month experience. And so, yeah, definitely not a perfect answer, but I would definitely say that my summer would not have been as successful without that Gateway course.
Yeah, I agree. I would say more so than prepare. It was more, the class helped me frame my summer experience and how I conceptualize community. It was a little bit of a daunting process because even though I was going back home, it was again that having to examine my positionality in relation to everybody else in my organization and the migrants I would be working with and my hometown. That was very daunting because it made me realize that the place that I'd known all my life, I really didn't know that well at all. And so I think that having that opportunity to interrogate how I was really situating myself in that community helped me enter with less of a mindset of get in, make a change, get out, and more so really try to slow down and be present and establish the connections that I needed to establish in that moment. And definitely were a lot of questions floating around in class about, like, the summer is only 2 months long. How do we conduct this ethically? How do we go into communities that are facing issues that we deem unstable and then all of a sudden leave that instability be? And so I think that the opportunity to grapple with those questions alongside everybody else and in different contexts, and now coming back and seeing how people really approach those experiences in that sense of urgency, I just think that is the sort of like preparation that we had for engaging with a community and really understanding what community meant to each of us.
Yeah, I would say similar. I really think in some sense Soul is like a paradox. Like if you fully buy into the theories and practices of the Gateway course, you realize that it's impossible to avoid the ethical gray area of going into a community for 8 weeks and then leaving right afterward. And so in some sense, my really not satisfactory answer to your question is that it doesn't prepare you to answer questions you have about the experience of entering that community. I think it helps you ask the right questions, which is probably more valuable as a form of preparation. Like, Whitesburg is 99.7% white. Like, I've never been to a place that white in my life. And the like a few days after I left, there was a huge flood that tore down my workplace and made national news. Like, the national news was covering this the entire day. And so these are things that the class does not predict, right? Like, what the class does give you is a chance to think about what questions to ask, and then when you return, what you want to share with the people around you who have all experienced very similar things and unforeseen circumstances that you then get to work on together. So that's my answer.
One comment to that, Andrew, I so appreciate you saying, one of the things that we're up to in Seoul, and this has been a little bit of a theme of all the comments, is we do want you to have some answers, right? We don't want you to just leave more confused than you started, but really the practice is about learning to ask better questions. And I often distinguish between making sense and making meaning. There's some things we want you to make sense out of. We want you to understand it better. There's some things that are actually really hard to understand. We want you to still make meaning out of it and have the capacity and framework for it to be a meaningful experience, even if it doesn't entirely make sense yet, because you will still have time for it to sort of that sense to unfold itself. So I think that's one way of understanding what we're up to is the difference between sense and meaning. We want this to be a meaningful experience that impacts you both in the near term, and then ultimately what we're up to is that we want to prepare you for a life of participation in public work, whether that's through your career or through your sort of co-curriculars once you graduate, your sort of outside of class activities, but for this is a lifelong commitment to leadership in the public space. Other questions?
Any questions about the application? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Don't be shy.
So I guess my question, if I phrase this correctly, so you guys have talked a lot about, talked a lot of snippets about things that you learned in the class, which is really cool. Is there anything that comes to mind if I ask, is there something that you had to unlearn when you took the class? Like a way of thinking that you really had to change? I think some of the things you have hinted at that, but I was just wondering if anything comes to mind.
I can
Kind of a weird question.
No, it's a great question. Like a lot. I think I had to redefine entirely what leadership meant to me, because you learn about theories of leadership, and those will challenge your pre-existing conceptions of, for instance, the military style, strict parent leadership. And you also have leaders that are teaching the class. Professor Zagabayo, Professor Nurkin, great examples of leaders who facilitate. So my mentor, Annie Jane Cotton, who is at the Letcher County Culture Hub, she made it a point the first day to not call her the leader of the organization. She made it a point to call her the facilitator. And that made like a lot of sense. Like we'd have discussions between the different nonprofits, and she was not the person with any sort of veto power. It just didn't work like that. She would ask for people's input, and she'd be a connector. Like I tell her I'm interested in podcasts and this sort of thing, and she's like, oh, you should do this community radio thing in Apple Shop. I had no idea it existed. And so that being a form of leadership is not something I actually understood before coming into Soul, or at least felt. And so that's like the big thing, like not just the authoritative figure who's at the front of the room, but maybe leading from behind, or leading by being with, like leading just by being a shoulder to cry on, or someone who's just there for you in a time of need. That's a form of leadership, and that had not really conceptualized as leadership before the course. And so it all just plays out around you in practice with the community that you are a part of in the cohort, but also what you're reading, and then what inevitably becomes part of your summer as you take up these roles in many cases, positions that are not prestigious or not big or resume boosting necessarily in a very traditional sense, but then you realize that those roles are in many cases just as important. And every single person is crucial to the success of a collective effort. And so in a lot of ways, what Soul does is it actually asks you to widen the umbrella of what leadership actually looks like, and for you to consider that the different forms of leadership, and that leadership is a multidimensional concept.
Yeah, I think leadership was definitely also one of the biggest parts I had to reconceptualize. I think that for me, leadership was always a space to prove to others how much I could do and how well I could do it. And I think that Soul allowed me to kind of relinquish that notion of what it meant to be a strong leader. And at the same time, acknowledge like where transformation actually happens. And I think that really led me to understand just how crucial like community had always been to my context, and I had just never realized and like opened my eyes to that. I think another thing was understanding how to approach communities that we view as like disadvantaged, or that we're helping, less as like a problem to be solved and more as like a group of people that you want to like commit to and like make commitments with in order to create something from what is already being done that maybe you don't see, or that maybe is on the margins. And like kind of pushing away this idea of like constantly innovating, doing something new, to prove yourself or to show that you're very intelligent, and you just because you can, and more so just like, I don't know, co-creating something alongside a community that really understands what they need and what they have been doing and what they need you to do. And so, yeah, I mean, community and leadership are like central tenets of Soul for a reason, and I think that's because the very first questions you learn to ask are dealing with that and having you reconceptualize exactly what you imagined those to be.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing for me is definitely like ideas of community. I don't know if this is like common among like people of diasporic backgrounds, but I like never really understood the idea of community as like geographically grounded, because I was like, oh, like I got a community across the world, like that's kind of lit. But I remember like in our gateway class, Professor Zagbayu was like, we're going to choose a community and we're going to do like the asset inventory, which I can get into a little later. And I was like, the reproductive justice movement. And And Professor Bai was like, like, you can't, it's not what I meant. And I was like, oh, like, what do you mean? And she was like, you need to pick like a community that's geographically rooted. And so like, I was like, okay. So I chose like my community, but even then I was like, okay, like, cool, like, community that's all in one spot, like, whatever, which is like so problematic. But I ended up like going to my summer, and like I mentioned, like I primarily worked on 2 events in Durham, or in North Carolina. I worked on one in Durham, and I worked on one in Wingate, North Carolina, which is a very small and tight-knit community. That is actually the hometown of Sister Song's executive director, Monica Ray Simpson. But what happened was the Durham stop of the tour was very much kind of like what I conceptualized community to be. It was a lot of people coming together from organizations and backgrounds that are very distinctly and directly tied to reproductive justice. And it was a wonderful event. Like, don't get me wrong, like, people were learning things, people were having fun. But people also fundamentally understood what reproductive justice was. And for a lot of reasons, that was not particularly one of the main missions of the RJ on Tour program in general. It was meant to be an outreach event. It was meant to show people how reproductive justice is important to you, even if you, A, like, are of faith backgrounds, B, like, maybe aren't capable of reproduction, maybe you're queer. Like, it's meant to show people how reproductive justice is a holistic framework. So fast forward, we went to Wingate. Very small, tight-knit community. A lot of people didn't even know what reproductive justice was. They were just there because it was their Juneteenth festival. And that was where I was like, oh, like, I get it now. Because the people there were a lot of people who, I can tell you right now, like, probably were pretty happy when the Dobbs decision passed. They probably didn't understand, like, what reproductive justice was. And they probably, like, were very hesitant to, they probably would not have engaged with Sister Song had we not gone to their event. And I think what I saw at that event was that, like, if I, like, went up to them and I was like, hey, like, learn about reproductive justice, they just genuinely would not care. It just doesn't pertain to them. The language that we use isn't accessible to them. But because it was the hometown of the executive director, she was there, and because, like, we were in contact with the community, people cared about reproductive justice because people they loved cared about reproductive justice. And, like, that was such a powerful thing that I could not even imagine would be useful in throughout my summer and in this conception of community. And so it, like, made me really reconsider how community doesn't have to have, like, a productive mission. I always thought, like, oh, like, what is, like, a neighborhood association going to do for me? I was like, we should be, like, movements, like, stick it to the man, like, we have to be productive, we have to have tangible results. And kind of like how what Andrew and Mariana articulated is that spending time with people and putting people before results can be one of the most beautiful things that you can experience and one of the most productive things that you can do for yourself in the long run. And yeah, I just saw, like, a lot of love in the Wingate stop, and so really glad I experienced that, because I was like, Professor Zagbayu, like, what do you mean? But I learned. I did get it a little late, though.
Any questions about the application process, deadlines, or any other questions for our panelists?
Just like a quick question, but does the internship count for the fall required internship for the major?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. We should have mentioned that. So yes, if you are Sanford major and you want to use, you're already declared, you want to use the SOL internship for your summer requirement, you can. You just got to run that through the career services folks, but we have been doing that for 20 years. I should also say the stipend is a set amount. We do ask you to build a budget for your summer, but you get kind of the set $5,000 stipend. You are also, if you're a Sanford major, eligible for the supplement to that from the Sanford School for your summer internship requirement. Yeah.
In terms of the internship, are we restricted geographically in terms of moving with vendors like international?
Absolutely. We've done many international projects. The only restrictions there is the Duke restricted regions list. So Duke, the university, maintains a list of places where offices cannot support student or faculty travel or work. Typically conflict zones, right? Some are entire countries are on that list, and some are just specific regions in the country. So we'll work with you depending on sort of where you're interested in. But yeah, we can absolutely support international projects. All right.
Any other questions? If any other questions come up, feel free to email me, lee.edelblue@duke.edu, and then there's more information on our website, of course. I will ask anyone who came in late, if you haven't had the chance to sign in yet, we've got a QR code on the table. So if you could please sign in, that will just help us follow up, and we'll send you the application link. But also, our application link is here. It's also on those sheets that are printed out on the table. Apply by October 5th. That's 1 week from tomorrow. Okay. Thank you all for coming. And thank you to our panelists. You guys are great.